How well do you really know the people living next to you? You share a wall, a fence, a quiet street. You might even give them a friendly wave. But what happens when that friendly wave starts to feel like a constant watch? When the person next door isn't just a neighbor, but a nightmare waiting to unfold. Stalking is a terrifyingly common reality. An estimated 13.5 million people are stalked in the US each year. And for a huge number of victims, the perpetrator isn't some shadowy stranger or even an ex-partner. The vast majority of stalking victims are stalked by someone they know. Often, it's an acquaintance, or, as these stories show, a neighbor. These 4 true accounts reveal the chilling reality of what can happen when the danger is already home. Story 1. The man in the window. When Maya moved into her second-floor apartment, the first person she met was her downstairs neighbor, a quiet, middle-aged man named Frank. He seemed pleasant enough, offering to help with a heavy box and giving her a small, potted plant as a housewarming gift. The gesture felt kind, almost old-fashioned. But that kindness soon curdled into something else entirely. It started small. Every time she left for work, he'd be out on his porch, smoking a cigarette, and would call out a simple, "Have a good day." When she returned, he'd be there again. Welcome home. At first, she thought it was just the routine of a lonely retiree. But then she started noticing his face in his window, a pale shape in the darkness, whenever she'd come home late or have a friend over. The feeling of being watched became a constant, suffocating weight. She'd close her blinds, but could still feel his gaze on the other side. She started taking different routes home and parking blocks away, but somehow, he always seemed to know when she arrived. One evening, she dropped her keys in the dimly lit hallway. As she knelt to pick them up, she saw a faint line of light from under Frank's door. He was standing there, his shadow a silent, looming figure on the other side, just waiting. This constant monitoring is a classic stalking tactic, where the offender makes their presence known, turning a victim's safe spaces into places of fear. The psychological toll was immense. She experienced high levels of anxiety and had trouble sleeping, which are common impacts for stalking victims who suffer from the constant stress and fear. The dread of not knowing what he would do next was paralyzing. She complained to her landlord, who just dismissed it as a lonely old man being overly friendly. She felt isolated and helpless, a feeling many victims share. The breaking point came when a package was delivered to her door. It was another potted plant, identical to the first one, with a simple note: "I see you like to stay up late. These bloom best in low light." He wasn't just watching when she came and went. He was watching her inside her own home. That night, she packed a bag and stayed at a friend's house. She became one of the 1 in 7 stalking victims who are forced to move just to escape. That constant surveillance is its own special kind of horror. But our next story shows how subtle psychological games, the kind designed to make you question your own sanity, can be just as terrifying. Story 2. The Sound Sleeper. For Mark and Chloe, their new house was a dream. A small starter home on a quiet suburban street. Their only direct neighbor was an older woman named Eleanor, who lived alone. She was perfectly polite during their first few encounters, talking about gardening and the weather. The peace lasted for about a month. Then, the sounds began. It started with a faint tapping noise in the middle of the night, coming from the shared wall of their master bedroom. But when Mark would get up to investigate, it would stop. Chloe, who could sleep through a hurricane, never heard a thing. "It's just the house settling," she'd say, rolling back over. A week later, it was the sound of furniture being dragged across a hardwood floor, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Again, by the time Mark was fully awake, there was only silence. Mark started feeling exhausted and on edge. He'd bring it up to Eleanor in the yard. "Everything all right over there? Been hearing some strange noises at night?" She would look at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, dear me, no, I sleep like a stone. Must be your pipes." The incidents got more specific. He'd hear what sounded like a single cough on the other side of the wall, just as he was drifting off. He'd find small, odd things on his front porch: a single, dead leaf placed perfectly on the mat, a small, smooth stone by the door. Chloe saw nothing strange about it. "It's autumn, Mark, leaves fall." He honestly started to feel like he was losing his mind, which is a common goal of this kind of harassment, to make the victim question their own sanity. The final act of this slow burn torment was the most chilling. Mark installed a small security camera pointed at their shared fence line. For a week, nothing. He started to think maybe it really was all in his head. Then he checked the footage from the night before. At 2:47 a.m., a dark figure emerged from Eleanor's back door. It was her. She walked silently to the shared wall of their bedroom, put her ear against it for a long moment, and then, with a single finger, tapped 3 sharp times on the wooden siding before retreating into the darkness. She wasn't making noise randomly. She was listening, waiting for him to fall asleep, and then deliberately tormenting him. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare, and now Mark had the proof. Sometimes, the terror doesn't come from stealth or mind games. It starts with a simple disagreement that spirals out of control, and shows the frustrating struggle victims face when the people who are supposed to help, don't. Story 3. The property line. It all began over a fence. When the Peterson family moved in, they saw the fence separating their property from their neighbors, Mr. Gable, was old and falling apart. They offered to split the cost of a new one. Gable, a gruff and solitary man, refused. "That fence is fine, don't touch it." So, the Petersons decided to build a new fence a few inches inside their own property line, leaving the old one up. This seemed to enrage Mr. Gable. The day the new fence was finished, he came out screaming, accusing him of trying to steal his land and disrespecting him. From that day on, he began a campaign of escalating harassment. It started with his floodlights, which he angled to shine directly into the Petersons' bedroom windows all night. Then he started piling trash against their new fence. When they asked him to stop, he'd just stare at them before walking back inside. Like many victims of neighbor harassment, their attempts to communicate directly only made things worse. Feeling unheard, Mrs. Peterson wisely started an incident log, documenting every single thing with dates, times, and photos. This is a critical step for victims who need to build a legal case. The log filled up fast, obscenities yelled over the fence, a dead squirrel left on the driveway, loud, violent music blasted at 6 a.m. on a Sunday. They filed multiple police reports, but because there was no direct physical violence, officers were hesitant to do much beyond giving Mr. Gable a verbal warning. The situation reached a terrifying climax one afternoon when the Petersons' 10-year-old son was playing in the backyard. Mr. Gable began screaming threats at him over the fence, his voice filled with a venom that made Mrs. Peterson's blood run cold. She called 911 immediately. This time, with a direct threat against a child and a detailed log of escalating behavior, the police took it seriously. After reviewing her documentation and speaking with a clearly agitated Mr. Gable, they arrested him for harassment and making terroristic threats. The Petersons eventually got a restraining order, but their sense of safety in their own home was shattered forever. For our final story, we look at the ultimate violation. It's what happens when the threat isn't just outside your walls, but has actually found a way inside your home, a terrifying reality for victims whose stalkers sneak into their house or car. Story 4. The Open Door. Liam was a medical resident who worked long, unpredictable hours. He lived in a duplex, sharing a wall with a man named Kevin, a freelance programmer who rarely seemed to leave his house. They barely interacted beyond a quick nod in the driveway. Liam started to notice small things he couldn't explain. He'd come home after a 36-hour shift to find a living room window slightly ajar that he was sure he'd locked. He'd find a book from his nightstand moved to his coffee table. He just chalked it up to being exhausted. Memory gets weird when you're that sleep-deprived. He started to doubt his own mind, which is exactly what so many victims of these situations go through. The feeling of unease solidified into real fear one morning. He had a specific routine: make coffee, take his vitamins from a weekly pill organizer, and leave for the hospital. That morning, he opened his organizer and saw that Tuesday's pills were gone. He knew, with absolute certainty, he hadn't taken them. Someone else had been in his apartment and had opened that container. A wave of cold dread washed over him. He thought of Kevin next door. He thought about how the man was always home, how he could hear Liam's every move through the thin walls. He immediately called a locksmith to change the locks and installed a small, hidden camera facing his front door. He didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, a notification hit his phone at the hospital. The camera had detected motion. He opened the live feed, his heart pounding. The video showed his front door slowly creaking open. And then Kevin stepped inside. He didn't look around like a burglar. He moved with a quiet confidence, like he belonged there. He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and just stood there for a moment, looking at its contents. He then walked into Liam's bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and just stayed there for nearly a minute before getting up and leaving as silently as he came. Liam was watching a stranger make himself at home in his most private space. The violation was absolute. He left the hospital, went straight to the police station, and showed him the video. It was the undeniable proof he needed. Kevin wasn't just a quiet neighbor, he was a stalker who had found a way inside, turning Liam's sanctuary into a stage for his silent, terrifying intrusions. Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary, the one place in the world you can feel completely safe. But as these stories show, sometimes the greatest threats are living just a few feet away. The violation of that safety, whether through constant surveillance, psychological games, or outright trespassing, leaves deep and lasting scars. This is why the overwhelming majority of stalking victims report feeling fearful or threatened, a trauma that doesn't just disappear when you move away or when an arrest is made. If you have a terrifying neighbor story of your own, share it in the comments below. Reading about shared experiences can be a powerful tool for those who feel isolated by their situation. And if you found these accounts as chilling as we did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true stories that remind us to always be aware of who is closest to home.